I'm angry. I'm angry at them for what they're doing.
There was active policies that dismantled the working class.
You know, once they used to say that they were the party for the working class, but also of the working class. And now they don't say that. I was asking them what did they want. You know, what is it that you want? What do you hope for? And you know what they said? And they're 18. They said, oh, I hope one day I'd be able to buy a house and get married.
Well, we destroyed the pensions.
Yes.
We destroyed savings in banks.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure when I was a kid, my dad was getting 6-7%
Yeah,
a year
We've
in the building society.
destroyed the housing market.
Who is our country for now? Who is Britain for? Morning, Lisa. Morning, Keith. How are you both?
Good.
Thank you for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. I really wanted to do this interview because of the research and the work that you both have done. But I really just want to start with quite a simple question. What is the working class today?
Do you want to do that one?
You can start with that, Lisa. I'm the historian. You're the more contemporary.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Class
Yeah, that's
expert.
right. Keith's the historian, so he can tell you what the working class was. I'll tell you what the working class is. Who are the working class today? Working class people today, unlike, I think there's a debate happening in the country about what is class and is it relevant anymore. But I would argue that, of course, it is. Our system in Britain is still run on a class system. We've still got people who are inherently privileged, you know, from birth. And we've also got people who are not privileged, and and that comes from birth as well. If you're born into a working class family in Britain today, social mobility, this I suppose this fabled social mobility that they keep telling us exists, that, you know, it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where you go that counts. Well, the truth is social mobility in this country has stopped. So you are more likely, if you're born in a working class position, people at the bottom, people who are poor, that's where you're going to stay. And I know that the meritocracy people do not like that. They don't like, but that's the truth. That is the truth.
And why is that?
It's because, well, there's many reasons. The way that our economy works, the way that privilege works, you know, class privilege works. I read this. I'm a working class woman myself. I'm from a council estate, from a mining community. My dad was a striking miner in Nottingham. I worked in a factory making tights for 11 years when I first left school with no qualifications. So my mum worked in that same tights factory. Therefore, I'm working class. So it's unusual now that I'm an academic, but I'm aware that I am an unusual. Everybody else I was at school with, you know, are still living, you know, the place where I come from, Sutton in Ashfield, you know, and they're still have got working class jobs and working class lives. You know, I've just got this academic job, but I'm still living a working class life.
Do you consider yourself still working class?
Yes. Yeah. And the reason why I'm still working class is because I don't own anything. I don't own a house. I'm renting. I'm quite precarious. Universities are very precarious. They're also very class-ridden as well. So when you're working class at a university, you don't have these innate advantages. You know, you have the disadvantages of your class. And then you've got to look at the other side of the advantages of your class. So if you are middle class or upper middle class, you know, you've been brought up in a household where perhaps, you know, there's holidays, there's reading time, there's, you know, you might even have gone to a private school. So rather than in the state school, you've got 35 kids in your class. In a private school, there's sort of 10. So there's all these advantages in middle class life, which means that also the advantages of who you know. You know, your connection.
Your network.
Yeah, your networks. I mean, I read, as a sociologist, I read this particular social theorist called Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu. And he explains class. And I think I still, I'm not a Marxist, so I don't describe class as, you know, everybody works is working class. That's
Yes.
Instead, what I do is I think about all these advantages, these resources that you've got. So Pierre Bourdieu, he looks at resources and he calls it capital. And I'm sure you understand this because this is your world, this capital. But what he does is he looks at it in the social world. So you've got something called economic capital. You know what that is? That's wealth. It's money and wealth. So if you've got lots of that, then you're advantaged. And then there's something called social capital. Well, that's your networks. And if you've got really good networks that are influential, then that's really good for you. You've got advantage as well. Then there's cultural capital. Well, that's, your connection to the arts, to education. And if you've got high cultural capital, then again, you've got lots of advantages. And then the last one is symbolic capital. And that's all of it. And that means symbolically, you've got status, high status. So if you've got lots of all of that, then you are really advantaged. Your life is going to take on a particular, you're going to move through life in a particular way. If you haven't got any of those things, then you're going to move through life in a very different way.
And let me just ask you on that, when you think about this, you don't believe we should just flatten class. Do you believe there is a political answer to just give a more supporting role to those people who don't have access to this?
Well, I think
I've answered kind of for you, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No. Well, that's called policy, isn't it? And what we've had for years and years is all these different policies. Policies on.
But while we recognise class, what is it we should be doing with it?
What should we do with class? I mean, first thing is to recognise it. And I think although you're recognising it, let's be honest, most people don't. They don't want to recognise it. Because if you're middle class, and that is me, Lisa McKenzie, saying to you, you've got inherent advantages that you didn't deserve. You just got them. And I got inherent disadvantages that I didn't deserve either. So who wants to admit that?
Can I just come in?
Yeah, please,
It's a really important point. But because I think what we saw was the destruction of the working class. So there was this is going back to the 80s, 90s, and as we go into the new century, there was active policies that dismantled the working class that Lisa now describes. And looking at this historically, I'm like Lisa, I was born on a council estate. Grandfathers on both sides were coal miners, and they were part of that working class world that emerged early 20th century, but really came into its own in the 1950s and 1960s. What did that consist of? It consisted of usually living in a council house, usually having a job for life with a decent pension, and predominantly voting for a Labour Party that was meant to represent their interests.
Yeah.
So what we've seen, and kind of Lisa looks at the outcome of all this, I'm interested in it historically, but that period really from the mid-70s, but particularly in the 80s and 90s, that old working class world was actively dismantled through the kind of economic policies that were introduced by the Conservatives, but also through the new Labour years.
Was it a lot easier to separate class then in that it was really kind of, you were kind of really Labour or Conservative?
Well, you have the classic three-class model, didn't you? You had, and obviously with outliers, the classic working class Tory personified by, in popular comedy like Albert Steptoe, Alf Garnett. You had that, you had the outliers, but
and then you had the middle class socialists as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
You had the people who were very, they'd been to private school but now they're sort of rebelling against their family. So you've always had this sort of cross-class around politics. But what, as Keith is sort of saying now, is so the class of my childhood, which we had work, but we also had a cultural life around that work as well. So, we had, where I come from, we had the miners' welfares.
Yeah.
This is kind of a Marxist quote, but it did work for us, actually. People were coal miners in the day or factory workers in the day, and then at night they could be the singer in the pub. So there was a cultural life attached to working class life as well. The Northern Soul clubs, working class culture was very vibrant. And sometimes it got people on the top of the pops, or they got groups, or, but that's been dismantled. So what Keith is talking about is from that sort of, when would you say it was, Keith? It started.
Well, we get the end of the long economic boom in 1973, 1974, and I guess the mid 1970s probably the high point of that working class world. we had the two big national miners' strikes, 72, 74. Wages are rising, but then we've got economic decline from the 70s, and then a completely new economic model as we move into the 1980s, which we see, wide-scale closures of steel plants, of coal mines, of textiles. So that whole manufacturing base that had built that working-class world, which, as Lisa says, I think it's really important to see that world not just in economic terms,
in social,
and in occupational terms, but in cultural terms. And I think this is...
It was more than losing jobs.
Oh,
yeah.
More.
These communities, and don't forget, these communities have been developing from right through the 19th century, through that Industrial Revolution. Some of these communities never existed before coal mines or textiles. So it was that working class world.
Well, where I come from, I mean, in Nottinghamshire, where I am, there was a coal mine every mile. And because of that, all the men worked in the coal mines, but as well, we had factories, and the women worked in the factories, and we were making, everything Marks and Spencer's was made in these factories. 1990, Marks and Spencer's changed its policy, and they say, right, we need to be more competitive. Marks and Spencer's before that, it was always made in England. Everything was made in this country. 1990, to be more competitive, they said, right, we're going to have to open our markets. And that was when, the work went abroad.
Globalism.
Yes, the work went abroad. And what that meant is communities like mine, where I lived, at the same time as the pits are closing, the factories are closing at the same time, that early 90s. And what we've had since that period, I'm going to say it's devastation.
Yeah.
It's as shocking. Imagine the Industrial Revolution, how shocking that would have been for the farmers, for the peasants, that all of a sudden these factories are opening and they're took off the land and they're thrown into this world of, mechanical, mechanics. They don't know what's happening. It's shocking. Well, equally at the end, when we deindustrialise, it's equally as shocking.
This show is brought to you by my lead sponsor, Iron, the AI cloud for the next big thing. Iron builds and operates next-generation data centers and delivers cutting-edge GPU infrastructure, all powered by renewable energy. Now, if you need access to scalable GPU clusters or are simply curious about who is powering the future of AI, check out iron.com to learn more, which is IREN.com. Well, Keith, you were a miner. You went through this.
Yes.
Help us understand.
So yeah, again, going back to the kind of that whole world, I mean, Lisa had these similar experiences to me, that when I was in comprehensive school, went to high school, the kind of poshest person that I knew was probably someone who was a teacher, because that was the kind of world you were living in. And I was the last generation really that went through this, I guess, this version of old Labour Britain, where I left school at 16. I was on a YTS for a few months, which again is another story about unemployment and how you deal with that. But then going into the mines, then it was the kind of dying embers of it. So I worked from 1985 to 1992.
How many people in your class will have gone into the mines?
There was that you either gone to the mines or you'd have gone into the steelworks or you'd have gone into some kind of manufacturing. But even at that point, because the other thing we have to remember about British industry, and particularly the coal industry, it was in decline from the 1950s and into the 1960s. There's a huge program of mine closures under the Wilson government from 66 to 70. So a lot of these communities that you associate with the working class, tight-knit communities, they were already, some of them were being dismantled then. So if you look at, I'll just give you a kind of figure that illustrates this. At the outbreak of the First World War, you've got over a million people employed in coal mining. A million. So how central it was to our economy cannot be over-exaggerated. And then you get to a point in the early 1990s where there's around 15,000 miners left. Then we move forward to 2015, the last mine closes. So the scale, as Lisa says, the scale of that devastation, but also the pace of it.
Yeah.
You're going from a position in the 1970s where you've still got this idea that you could leave school at 16, you could get a job which was decently paid, which you'd have a good pension at the end of it, to then within 10, 15 years of that whole world being completely dismantled. And another example of this, I think, which is really striking, is if you go to places where there were former coal mines, because often you find there now Amazon warehouses, JJB Sports.
Yeah.
So that kind of employment that we have now and those conditions are in stark contrast to what you had with mining and engineering and
in Shirebrook, which so in 1984 I was 16, and my dad was on strike. He was a Nottinghamshire striking miner, which was quite unusual because Nottinghamshire worked through it. And there was a pit called Shirebrook. It's a mining village, and it was called at the time, I think they called it sort of Little Belfast, because most of the miners in this one village were on strike, but there was a hardcore that was working. And when you went to Shirebrook, you could see the houses where the people who were working, because they were boarded up. They're doing, and it was bitter. That sort of strike in that village was absolutely bitter. And it was well known at the time, what was happening in Shirebrook. It was sort of a front line in the area for the strike. But then the pits closed. Everything closed there, the factories, everything closed. By the end of the 90s, early 2000s, it's absolutely devastated.
Give me a picture of what happens into that community afterwards. What's the lived experience after a pit closes?
Well, the lived experience, as they said, it's devastation. So
what does that mean?
I'll give you an example of, and again, I think a really good example of this would be a place like Easington on the northeast coast, which was a key. There was nothing else there. There was the coal mine and the council housing development all around it. So overnight, you've got mass unemployment.
Yeah.
So you have that. And then following on from that, you've got unemployment, you've got poverty, you've got inequality, but also all the psychological and social problems that brings. Ill health, mental illness, all
alcoholism.
Alcoholism. I mean, and then crime. And then what we're seeing across the UK now, it's
a disintegration of the social fabric. So it's not just the jobs went. So in Shirebrook, so it's a good example, Shirebrook is, because everything went. So you imagine everybody's unemployed, everybody. What happens to the butchers? What happens to
no customers?
Yeah. What happens to the... Right, I'm going to say something now. Nobody will know unless you're in Nottinghamshire. The cob shop. Sandwich shop.
Oh, yeah.
What happens to the cob shops? Well, it goes. Because all the girls that work in the factories who go there on the dinner, they've gone.
So everything goes.
So everything goes. And by the end of the 90s, 2000s, the pit's gone. And guess who comes along right on top of the pit? Sports Direct. Sports Direct then builds a warehouse. It's 4 miles in square. It's unbelievable, the size of it. And this warehouse, what they do is they employ at this time straight from Poland. So they're employing straight from Poland. So now this devastated town, and Shirebrook is what they call a model as well. It's a model village. So they used to build these pit villages around the pit. So you'd have the rows of houses, you'd have a school, you'd have 2 pubs, the miners' welfare. It was a model. So, and a lot of the miners had moved out because there was no work there. You had to leave. What could you do? So these places were then devastated. People were leaving. The council started using them to put in difficult tenants so that a lot of crime happened. And then at the end of the 90s, Sports Direct 2000s, Sports Direct comes. They employ straight from Poland. So in this community, there's mostly men coming from Poland now living in this community. And at the time, there was real unrest between the 2 groups.
Which there always is.
Yeah. I mean, now, I've been back there recently, and I've done interviews there and spoke to people there. The 2 communities have now realised that they're both working class.
Yeah.
And the town is sort of back on its feet a bit. They've got a market again. They've got a Polish butchers. And so now there's this... Now the Polish are very much part of the community and raised. However, there's another move now. Sports Direct, like all of these warehouses, don't employ as many people as they used to because of technology. So where there once was perhaps 200 people working in there, there's only perhaps 50. And so we're back in that again. A lot of the Polish are actually going home. They're going back because there's no work.
Yeah, and I just add two things to that. The first one would be the other big loss, and it's the thing we've been talking about in terms of class, is identity.
Yeah.
Because you were defined by what you did. You were defined by the job that you had and the community that you lived in. I mean, I vividly remember, like, you know, people would, you know, you'd see references on TV and everything to class. You instinctively knew that you were working class. And I think Lisa and I carry the scars of that all through our career.
Yeah.
You knew that you were working class, and I kind of instinctively knew that Labour was for us. That was the, you know, that was kind of inculcated. So that was the first thing. I think the identity, loss of identity is important.
Yeah.
But also, again, I think, and this is interesting in terms of migration, changing workforces, because in a very different time, 1950s, there was large numbers of Polish, Italian, Hungarian workers that came into the mining industry. So every single mine, almost every mine, I would say, had Polish workers, East European workers.
Get on well.
There was a kind of
And the Ukraine.
Well, they
as
were because
actually.
they were living in those same
They were
communities.
living in the
They were
community.
members of
And
the
there was a
union.
demand for the workforce.
Yeah, there was
Yes,
a demand for the
yeah,
workforce, but
yeah.
also there was
And they were earning decent money.
Yeah.
And everybody, for working class people, you know, but also, you know, nobody was going on foreign holidays or anything like that. We all went to Skegness,
Blackpool.
you know, or Blackpool, or, you know, so there was a real culture and an identity about who you were. As a kid, as a small kid, I knew I was working class.
What does that mean, though, then?
What?
If you knew you were working class,
Well, I
what
knew
does
I
that
was
mean?
working class because my granddad told me.
But what does that mean?
But you also, on that, Lisa, you knew because you spoke in a particular way.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, I mean, TV at that time in the 1970s, most voices you heard were middle class or posh voices, wasn't it? They on the sitcoms, Terry and June and all that. And you got working class voices there, but you kind of had a sense of where you were.
But I knew I was working class because my granddad told me. My granddad had said to me that, you know, we're working class, we're good people, we're not the richest, but we keep the lights on. My granddad told me we were that important that without us, the country couldn't exist.
Like the truckers in Canada.
Yeah. And I was told that being working class was like the best thing ever. And I used to, as a small kid, I think, I'm so lucky. Imagine being working class. I could have been, you know, somewhere else. But, you know, this is how lucky we are. That changed.
But also coal miners were seen as the kind of, they epitomised that industrial working class.
But,
you know, they were
built the country.
It was masculine, it built the country. Economically and politically, they were powerful in terms of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't go on strike very much. This is another mythology of, you know, there was the 1926 miners' lockout. Then there wasn't a strike then, a national strike till 72, 74, and then 84. So some coalfields were more militant than others. But, you know, for example, the miners played no role in the industrial discontent of the late 70s, winter of discontent and those kind of things. So
going back to what I said, though, early on, why is it important to recognise class now? And I'm through the lens of politics. I'm really looking at through the lens of politics. Why do we need to recognise it now? And add to that, because different. I think every political party says they represent working people. What does that even? What does that mean now?
Exactly.
Well, because I feel like we're lost in politics right now.
Well, they're saying working people because they don't want to do the language of class, and that's why they say working people. That's one of the the hilarious things about the Labour Party, that, you know, once they used to say that they were the party for the working class, but also of the working class, and now they don't say that.
Although Andy Burnham did in his speech 2 days ago, he said for working class people, and so I think that was a subtle kind of nod there to.
But is it more social and cultural these days than economic? Like, you can have a plumber these days can earn a good salary, can earn a 6-figure salary, but be working class. But you could be a graduate working in a university, maybe earning 40,000. It feels like working class now is cultural and social, not so much economic.
But levels of inequality in this country are higher than they've been for.
But just on that point, it's like it is working class, social and cultural.
Yes, it is. It is, but it's also economic. It's like what I was saying before. When you look at Bourdieu's model of class, what you're looking at is the interrelationship between these things. So if you are a graduate, you know, and you've got family that can afford for you to go and do an internship in London, you know, working in the media, then then you might not be earning lots of money, but you've got lots and lots of cultural and social capital.
Yeah.
But you've also got an income coming from somewhere else that's keeping you there. If you're working class and this is what has happened actually to our culture industries and our media and the arts, working class people used to play a role in that. Now, I think we went to a conference in December, which was called, why are working class people not on television? And in television, only 5% of the people who work in television are working class. So what has now happened is there are great swathes. I call it the interesting work. Who is entitled to do interesting work? And it's not the working class, because the truth is, to do interesting work, you've got to be in London. And if you can't afford to be there, or you can't do free work, then you're not in interesting work anymore.
And I think on that as well.
So the cultural story of our country is being told through a particular lens. So this is all political. So it's soft politics, but it's very powerful. Who tells the story of who we are? And now that's why I think we've got this alienation in politics with working class people, because they're not hearing or seeing their story. And why would they? Because the storytellers are not them.
Yeah. And I think the difference is as well, you talk about kind of, if we take middle class graduates, for example, they're in line to enjoy huge inheritances through their parents' properties. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? I mean, housing is so important to all this. And if you're in rented housing and you're from a low economic background, working class areas, you're not going to inherit anything. And I think that's the other thing, the bank of mum and dad or whatever, it works for middle class graduates who can take low paid work or precarious work in the culture industries because they've got the networks, but there's also a whole financial system there within the family that can support them.
So it's the social mobility is the primary issue, in that if you are working class, you're almost trapped there because you don't have these networks and opportunities.
Well, also the university, our higher education system, as Lisa said, is completely divided along class lines. So
when you're in there, or access, because didn't Blair do a lot of work for access?
No, but what happened? So middle class kids go to elite universities.
Yes,
that's what's happened.
Yeah, and the universities that we work at. I mean, for example, University of Bedfordshire, where I work at, I teach local people. And do you know what? And I'm proud of that, actually. I love it that I'm teaching mostly working class women from the Bedford, Milton Keynes area. Women like me, women who work in warehouse, and because the Bedford area, full of warehouses, absolutely full of warehouses, and lots of
massive Amazon one on the edge.
Yeah, and lots of Eastern European people came to that area to work in those warehouses, and then now I'm teaching mostly women who want to do something better with it. That's what they say every time every year they say, "I'm here because I want to do better for my kids."
And I think on that, Lisa, that's one of the components you haven't mentioned about those traditional working class communities was the ethos on education. So my education was the coal mine. That's what it was. The union sent me on day release courses. You could study history, politics. In South Wales, you had the South Wales Miners' Libraries. So they're
prepping you.
There's always been a strong ethos within working class communities of self-education, and and the politics informed that. I mean, I think that's the other thing you have to remember as well, that the decline, for example, in Labour Party membership was huge even by the late 1960s. And then obviously as we moved through, we had a kind of bit of an uplift with Corbyn, different kind of members coming into the party. But I think that's the other point, because I guess we're going to move on to politics, but I think this is a really important part of it. As you said, whatever politician you talk to or political party, they somehow want to take us back to this Britain that Lisa and I are talking about. And yet they've introduced policies for the last 30 years that have dismantled it.
Yeah.
I think that's again,
well, politics is everything now. I feel like and the media, social media has had that impact. I remember as a kid, it was like, Dad, you'll remember this, 6 o'clock news, Dad's in the settee, don't make a sound. Yeah. He's going to watch the news half an hour, and that was it. And then there wasn't very much political conversation. I remember my brother and dad having discussions. My dad was, as I told you, a He's working class, conservative,
Yeah.
who elevated us into a middle class life. My brother is very much a Labour supporter, so they had big disagreements. But that was all politics was. Now, with 24-hour news, social media, politics feels like it's everything.
Yeah.
It's like most people are hanging their hat on when's the next election, who are going to get blah, blah, blah. So politics is everything. If we recognise class, what is it we want from our politicians? Because they all say they represent working people.
Yeah.
But does anyone now?
What they're doing is they're trying to
farm votes.
Yeah, well, what they're trying to do, do you know what? Mick Lynch, he was the leader of the rail. Was it the rail union? So he was the leader of the rail union, Mick Lynch, and he was 2-3 years ago. He was the big left hope. He was going to change the left, and he was going to bring working class politics back, and he was going to change the left wing politics. And he obviously didn't. And I remember an interview that he did, and it was for the Guardian podcast. And they had this conversation that we're having about who is working class and how do we know. Mick Lynch, this great hope of the trade unions, said, in his opinion, that if you earned $100,000 a year and you'd got a mortgage that was £1 million, you were still working class. Mick Lynch said this, and he says, because in my opinion, if you have to work for a living, you're working class. Now that's the old Marxist.
That's the Marxist.
Yeah, that's the old Marxist.
You have to sell your labour.
Yeah, and it's like, because and they asked him, are barristers working class? And he said, yeah. And I'm just sat there like, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because if you're not talking about the inequalities and the real lived experiences of working class people, and you're extending it to people with £1 million mortgage, you're saying that the person with the £1 million mortgage is the same person who's renting privately and it's costing them 60% of their earnings.
Living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah. Or, as we found out, is people going to food banks, eating from food banks in order to service rent. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be the trade union official here.
But that's on that though, Lisa, there's a politics, isn't there? Because the Labour Party has always relied on a coalition between the working class and the middle class. That's, historically the party's had middle class socialists and working class trade unionists. It's had to have that coalition in order to win in our electoral system to win elections.
But have they totally lost their way?
Well, I think what we've seen what happened is that because the working class became less economically and politically important in terms of the form that it took in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Once you take away that economic and political power, then, this was a classic thing with Peter Mandelson, wasn't it? He said, well, they'll always vote Labour anyway. These people will always vote Labour. Of course, we now know that they don't.
Yeah.
And that's been the issue. So they took that vote for granted. But yeah, it's difficult. I mean, the Conservatives have relied on working class votes in particular constituencies as well.
Yeah.
But it's been a particular problem for Labour. And in recent years, might be different with Burnham, people who can go beyond that and try to build something different. I mean, Burnham's success in Manchester is an example of that, and in the Makerfield constituency that he won, which was the Reform constituency, 97% white, and he managed to win that seat. So I think some politicians can make the right noises me and Lisa have talked about this a long time. The way that the economy and politics has been so disrupted since the 1980s, you're even more pessimistic than I am, but it is going to be difficult. But I think
I'm completely
there are
pessimistic.
policies that we can. You're
pessimistic on any political solution.
The political solution that is on the horizon now, I'm pessimistic because I'm not sure they even know what the problems are.
What are the problems? What are the primary problems?
Well, the primary problems is that, there's many. For a start, our infrastructure is not up for purpose. It's, we've got major problems with our infrastructure. Left-wing politics.
You mean just across the country?
Just across the country, yeah. Left-wing politics was always this, always. And this is why the bourgeois left annoy me, more than annoy me. In fact, angry. I'm angry at them for what they're doing, because left-wing politics, this is what it is. Left-wing politics is about 5 things, really. It's about housing, healthcare, education, jobs, cost of living. That's it. That's its bread and butter. That's what left-wing politics is. You've got to do those bread and butter things, because otherwise your country doesn't work. So if you're not doing those bread and butter things, so the middle class and those above, see, they've got the power and they've got the funds and they've got the capital to be able to cope with that. The working class, who are on very low wages, or actually now no wages, they need that's the state to do something. So if the state is not doing the things, then that's where left-wing politics are supposed to come in, where left-wing politics then go, right, okay, we need these basic things for everybody.
So when Labour went to the middle ground under Blair, was the working class essentially completely left behind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it went to the middle ground. I mean,
left out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he went to the... I mean, it was... Yeah, I mean, it was... There was some progressive reforms, devolution, sure start, there was tinkering at the edges, but the economic model was essentially the same. And I think that's the issue. You can, as Lee said, investment. The Starmer's government as well tinkered with some of the workplace rights, for example. So that needs to be reformed. I mean, the problem is, and it's a low wage economy, isn't it, for working class people?
Yeah.
That is the issue.
Extremely low wage.
If we compare it to what we talked about earlier, to the 1950s and 1960s, you could either have a council house, lots of working class people bought their own houses, and you had security in terms of the job that you did.
Job
you
for
had
life,
dignity,
pension.
you had all that.
And who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
I mean, now, you think about how crazy that is, that in that time, you could have, even do it on one wage. You could have a one wage family that could afford the basics, and then go to Skegness for a week.
Get through life completely.
The wife worked part-time. That's the thing. And that economic model is... it's not...
But you had an economic model and a social model as well, because there was things that supported you. So you weren't just workerist. You weren't just about going to work. You could also have a social life on top of that as well. You could have...
football.
Yeah, there was football.
Well, that's
you could afford a ticket.
I mean,
you could afford
that
a ticket.
was part of that culture again, which we didn't talk about, was sports in the Northwest, rugby league, football, cricket.
Yeah.
These were, the working class spectators.
My grandma and granddad were season ticket holders for Nottingham Forest. And, my grandma was the chairperson of the Sutton in Ashfield Forest Supporters Club. She went, she never went anywhere, but she used to go on a bus to see Forest. And that was like a big part of their life. Yep. So their life had meaning. So it's not just going to work and that's all we needed. It's having meaning in your life as well.
But also, I think what's interesting as well, this is if you compare, because I do a lot, and Lisa has as well, research on similar situations in the United States, and it's the same there.
Yeah.
Deindustrialization, 70s, 80s, Rust Belt areas, so high-paid jobs, unionized jobs, working class communities, again, all fragmented, which in some ways you can see how that leads to the rise of populism.
Yeah, help me understand. So traditional working class, you worked in factories, you worked in the mines, you worked in the steelworks, you had a job for life, hopefully, and a pension, and you could afford a life. Now we seem to have different kind of social economic groups. There are working class people who maybe you still have factories and you still have people doing trades, but there's also a large percentage of people now who work but rely on welfare to supplement their wage to be able to get by. And you also have a significant group of people who just don't work at all and just rely on welfare. Are these all still working class? Is this... What's changed here?
I mean, what's changed? They are still working class. Yeah, they are.
Should they all be represented in the same group?
I think so.
Yes,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah. The reason why is because if you're on welfare and not working at all, you're still working class. So the working bits, but it's about your positionality and your relationship to power. But
there appears to be a new dependency class they've created, whereby
we've always had they used to call it in the Victorian times the residuum, the people that were at the bottom. So we've always, and again, I think this is a feature of capitalism, that you will always have this residuum, these people at the bottom that are not, that you won't do anything, and whether that's because they're disabled or ill or, but if you've got a functioning economy, you have less of those people at the bottom, and that's really, I think, what we're talking about here is having a functioning economy. Doesn't subsidise.
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't subsidise industry.
Well, you wouldn't need to subsidise wages. Unions did their job. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? This is going back to the kind of politics of the right on this, which is crazy, isn't it? That they're against state intervention, and yet as taxpayers, we're subsidising employers. Yeah. Because their wages are so low that they have to be supplemented. And landlords. This is crazy. I mean, and this is across. Again, if you look at the Conservatives,
so what should a proper Labour Party be doing now?
Well, first, I mean,
go on, use it.
Well, I would. You can come in on this, Lisa, but I would. Yeah, Labour. I mean, Labour should be. I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but what they should be doing is giving more rights to people within the workplace, so they can campaign for higher wages. I'd have collective bargaining agreements, more rights for trade unions. That's the big thing they can do. I mean, they can also have mass building program of council houses, which is what's needed as well. Reform the education system.
For me, it would be. It's about education. Actually, education and skills. We need proper lifelong learning, and I mean proper lifelong learning, not the sort of soundbitey stuff that they talk about now.
Where have they gone wrong with education? Because to me, I like, as an outside observer to education, I think the VAT on private schools was an attack on working class people or lower middle class people trying to elevate their kids. My dad was an engineer, put me into private school because he did the overtime to do it. If VAT had been on school fees at the time, he couldn't have done it. It doesn't affect the rich. It affects those it affects social mobility. And my second observation on education now, it seems to be bourgeoisie class activism education these days. Am I right or am I wrong?
I would disagree.
Please tell me.
I'd say
7% of kids are educated privately. So why is that a kind of special group? It's 7%.
Do you disagree with there being private education?
Well, there shouldn't be a need for private. I think if your education system, you're buying advantage. I mean,
because that's
the problem. You're buying advantage.
If people are being honest about why they send their kids to private school, it's because they do realise that you get social capital from being there. Yeah. That's what you're buying. Yeah, you're buying a decent education, but you're also buying a network as well.
I'll tell you why I did it. You're right. I completely agree with you. I did it for multiple reasons. There is, the social capital is part of it, the smaller class sizes. Yeah. There is a higher, people argue against this, but there's generally maybe a higher standard of a teacher because you're paying more for the teachers, you maybe get the better ones. Yeah. Facilities is another one. Yeah, sports facilities. Yeah. So it's the whole package. Yeah. It just feels like a better product.
It is a better product. I mean, that's the whole point. It is a better product. Of course it is. But you're giving people an advantage. You can pay for that. So,
but do you disagree with it existing? Would you outlaw it?
No, I wouldn't outlaw it. Just because, if there are people, what I would rather do is focus on the state education and ask, right, why haven't we got this there? For me, that would be where my focus is.
Okay, great. So where have we gone wrong with it?
You're always going to have people, people who's been to Eton are always going to send their kids to Eton.
Plus, it's the sharp-head, elbowed middle classes that gets these debates onto the political agenda, isn't it? Like you said, it's 7%.
It is.
And also that 7% then dominate the professions. So there's only 7% of kids going to private education. Yeah. But the majority of judges,
especially now,
high-ranking journalists, privately educated politicians.
The culture industries. I mean, this is where it's really hit. This is where private education has really made a difference in the culture industry. Interesting work. That's where it's made a real difference. And that's also where it's crowded out working class people, because working class people could get through the arts. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, the universities that we work at now, some of them were art colleges. And the art colleges, anyone could go to them. So, that the route has gone. So by focusing on private education, for me, it's just you're in a war that we don't need to have.
So just what's gone wrong in education then?
Well, in our, I mean, it's not what's gone wrong. It's always been wrong.
Yeah.
When I left school in 1984, when my dad was on strike, that basically, the careers interview was, which factory do you want to work in? And I said, I'm going to work at Pretty Polly with my mum.
I had a similar one. I went to the careers officer, and I hated metalwork and woodwork. I'm useless at that kind of. This is when I was going to do the options, and the careers officer said, "What job are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'll probably go down the pit with my dad." And he said, "Well, you have to do metalwork for that." Yeah, but that's that's how it was. So the one thing you missed, Lisa, and again, I think this is really interesting because the other impact it's had is look at our political class. We used to be electing miners, steel workers. Up to the 1980s.
Well, we haven't got any.
It's a graduate class of
wankers. It's a specialist occupation.
I think they're all wankers, personally. I'm just using my language, but I think it's a graduate class.
Oh, no, they're an awful...
Yeah, and that's the problem. So they're not coming from those communities.
Our level of politician is dire, and we've been watching this. Again, this is another outcome of this.
Let's come back to that. Let's just keep on the education. Yeah. So the historic problem was you were basically told, you're here and you've got to stay here.
Yeah, well...
And the difference was, though, then, and I mean, it's going back to what we said, that, there was a lot of sociological research in the 60s about how working class people end up in working class jobs. And they were very critical of that culture and the politics at that time. But actually, if you had that now, that would be fantastic. If you could leave school at 16, have a high-paid job with a pension. But that doesn't happen. But the education was always in this country has always been stratified by class. Always.
I did an interview with some 18-year-old lads in Sutton in Ashfield, and they were at a alternative provision school. There were kids that had been chucked out of ordinary school, and they were 18, so I was interviewed them, and I was asking them what did they want. And, it's hard enough to get 18-year-old lads to talk to you anyway. Yeah. But, eventually we got round to, come on then, what is it that you want? What do you hope for? And you know what they said? And they're 18. They said, I hope one day I'd be able to buy a house and get married.
Yeah.
And that is a hope. That's like an aspiration. The talk was all about jobs. I need to get a job. I need to get a job. I don't know how to get a job.
But I think
we can't. There's no jobs. There's no jobs.
It's telling, isn't it, Lisa? Because I remember when I did my undergraduate degree at University of Manchester, again, mostly middle-class students, and then my PhD at York, again, mostly middle-class students. And at that time, I couldn't the only career I could think of, and again, it goes back to class background, was, I suppose I could become a teacher or a social worker. They were the only, I didn't want to do that, but they're the only two things that I could think of. Luckily, I did the PhD and then entered academia full-time. But it's that, the opportunity, it's just, it's not in that world, is it?
I did the same. I ended up on an access course to social work. The only reason I went on the access course to social work is because I'd known some other women who'd done that as well. But I didn't know that it was a wider issue. There were other subjects. And I'll tell you how I found out. Somebody from the University of Nottingham did a talk in my college that I was at. I was 32. My son was, 10, 11 at the time. And somebody come from the University of Nottingham and did a talk about sociology. And they said, somebody at the University of Nottingham had done this piece of research, and they'd made a book and a film about it, and it was called Poverty, the Forgotten Englishman, and it was by Ken Coates and Bill Silburn. And what they'd done is they'd gone into St Anne's, which is a council estate in Nottingham, where I lived at the time, and they'd done research there. And I thought, oh my God, I want to do that. I didn't know you could go to university and do research where you live. And I was like, yeah, I want to do that. So I watched the film and I read the book and I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And that's the only reason I went to do sociology, because I'd never heard of that before. And, and that was the start of the journey.
A door opened.
Yeah, a door opened, because I knew that, because then I'd gone, oh, hang on a minute, I could do that. I can do research in my community. And then obviously as I read the research and I started to think, there's some things missing here that I would have put in because I'm from there. And then, that was the opportunity.
But going back to that, Lisa, as well, we touched on this with education, because like all levels of education, universities are heavily kind of conditioned by social class. So if you look at the top universities, the academics in those universities, depending on the subject area, but in my area, history, they're more than likely to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge. They're usually sons and daughters of academics. So they've had that kind of culture growing up that this would be their career. And it's not, again, I think you can focus too much on the failure of education, but it's what happens after education. And Lisa's touched on this, I think, really well, that it's when you come out of school, college or university, there's certain occupations and certain worlds that you're never going to be able to access. And that is all about class.
That is about class.
And so that's my blind spot, right? Is the whole pull your socks up. It's a meritocracy.
You can pull your socks up all you want. If you don't know if you don't know it exists.
And I'm saying that from a world where if I want to start a business, I can get a loan, or I know who I can go to. I can make phone calls, and there's a network there.
And that, going back to it, where we began really, and that's what's changed for the working class. Because again, I'm the last beneficiary of it really, that I would be able to. I didn't have to get a loan when a student. I just crept in before loans came in. I was sponsored by the mining industry, which again did a lot of things like that. But now. I see it in terms of where I was as a working class 16-year-old. For the equivalent of me now, there is no way that a 16-year-old from my council estate would be a professor at university.
So I was the last year where they did free university.
Yes,
I was the last year. Was that an equivalent to the deindustrialization? Sorry, was that equivalent to deindustrialization? It took something away from the working class.
Well, it's a difficult one, that. It's complex because actually we see the increased number of working class kids going to university.
After that.
So it didn't prove to be a distance after that.
After that.
So
is it because the loan became more available?
Yeah.
Well,
funding.
Well, the whole, if you think about, again, that world that had changed, there's probably more working class kids in university now than there was in the 1980s than there's ever been. But that's partly due to the expansion of the higher education system
as an industry.
So there's more in the system, but again, it's where they're landing. So if you go from, Oxford, Cambridge, the classic examples, private schools, grammar schools, social elites, and it's almost like, you're familiar with the kind of football leagues, there is a kind of premiership. There's the champions.
There's a pecking order.
There's a pecking order. And if you look where a lot of working class kids end up, because they don't have those networks, they don't have that, this is what happens.
Is it a belief?
In the job market.
Is it a belief as well? I remember when I went to university. So, as I said, I'm going to say this. I'm probably going to sound like a dick, but I don't mean it sound like a dick. I had a middle class upbringing, and I went to university. And I remember one of my first friends I made, a chap called Noel, was from a working class background, and he said to me, it really stuck with me. He said, "Something you don't understand, Pete, is I was brought up to work for you, and you were brought up to be my boss." So is there a belief system that exists as well?
I don't know. I'm not sure it's a belief system. It's not that I believe that I should be in this position or not. I think it's sort of more nuanced than that. It's about the understanding of society and your place in it. So and there's also a reality to that as well. So when you get little kids, you talk to all little kids, some of them want to be lorry drivers, some of them want to be postman Pat. But as they get older, they might say things like, I want to be a doctor, or I want, and the idea that working class people have got, because this is what they throw at us, we don't have any ambition. And so therefore it's the ambition that's wrong. And if we just give working class people ambition, then we'll solve everything. But as you grow up from a small child, you realise every day that there are things that you can do, and then there's doors that's going to close. So there's a reality to your life. So everybody can say, "I want to be a lawyer," but you've got to know what a lawyer is, and if you've got parents that are lawyers, you know what that is. You know how to get to that.
You maybe have to speak like a lawyer.
But if you. What a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, this is an example. When I was a kid, I watched a film about Mark Twain, and I went, I want to be a writer. That's what I want to be. It was the same thing as I want to be Postman Pat, because I didn't know what a writer did or what they did or I could do it. But I did know that I liked stories and I liked to write and read stories. But I did know that. But then for the rest of my life, there was no, well, this is how you could be a writer and this is what a writer does. I eventually because I ended up on a access course and then I went to university, I eventually did become a writer. But there was something there. There was a.
But you're an outlier in that.
I am an outlier.
Whereas,
yeah.
in my daughter's school, for example, she's in a private school, and I don't mean that as anything other just to tell you a story. But whatever she says she wants to do, they're going to find a way.
Yeah.
Give her the pathway for that. We will, or the school will. I mean, at the moment she wants to be a tattoo artist, which I could think is quite cool.
Yeah.
Because she's creative. But if she came back and said, "Dad, I don't know, I want to be a lawyer," it's like, okay, great. Well, you're going to do these A levels, go there, university.
I see it with my daughter now, who's 19. She's a very different background to what I had. My daughter's in university in London now, and when I think of myself as 19 now, she's got far more confidence, far more just everything about is very different.
The generational benefits then by elevating
and because I go back because my mum still lives in a council bungalow in North Wales, and when I go and she lives in what was a kind of mining village on its council estate, and when I go back there now, the teenage girls and boys on that estate look very different to my daughter. They speak very different to my daughter. So that again, it's that class that you carry with you, which is kind of embedded in.
What does that make you think though when you go back and you see that?
It makes me think of what we've lost in terms of that working class world, that even though it was separate, but at least, as Lisa said, you could have a job, you could raise your family. There's that part to it, I think. It's that loss of that. But also, it's all that opportunity, isn't there? There could be, and Lisa's said a lot about this, but there could be great novelists in that estate. Yeah. There could be playwrights, there could be film directors.
So you accept class, you accept the hierarchy. What you don't accept is the loss of opportunity. That if someone wants to elevate or they have a talent, that opportunity is being missed.
Yeah. But it's been missed, and also let's not also forget, it's not just an accidental missed. It's purposeful. It's purposeful withholding, and the purposeful bit is. Number one, about ensuring that, the middle class is a class of itself for itself, and they work together, that they do that. And the second thing is, let's not forget that there is deep class prejudices and bigotry, in this country as well. There's deep, big class prejudice.
Tell me about that.
So, the way that, so I used to teach, I teach students about class prejudice and class bigotry, and I used Little Britain's Vicky Pollard to show that as an example. The way that we laugh at working class girls, the way that working class girls can be narrated, and it's fine to do that. They can be narrated as particularly white working class girls.
Middle class, so they go, ha ha, look.
Yeah, look at the state of it, oh, what a slag.
Chav.
Yes, but also even, and it gets darker because, sexually promiscuous, sexualized, working class girls are children much less than middle class girls. Yeah. A working class girl starts to become sexualized very young age, because, they're easy, they're slags, it's what they're like. And so we're moving a different territory now, but that's one of the reasons why the grooming gangs has been very difficult for the country to get their head round, because we all know that 12-year-old white working class girls from council estates are slags, don't we? And that stopped us really looking at what the grooming gangs were, because the deep class prejudices within the country, particularly around white working class girls.
Just on that, Lisa, as well, I think, and you would have experienced this, but even in kind of the academic job market, I've sat on interview panels where they've said, this person, he just, there's something, he sounded a bit more intelligent, whatever. And that was based on accent. And there's lots of research being done on that if you've got a strong regional accent, it's much more difficult to get into these professions or be selected. As you've said, and I've said it as well, with the middle classes, they've got the poise, they've got the confidence.
Yeah,
they
got
talk
the right
in
language.
particular ways. Yeah. So even regional accents, and this is where me and Lisa do agree on this one, we think class should be a protected characteristic.
Yeah.
Okay. How? In what way?
Well, the thing is, what we've got at the moment, and I suppose all we do is just think about where we are now. So where we are now is white working class young people are right at the bottom of education attainment, health, jobs, all of it.
By the way, just on that point, and I see your head sideways, Connor would probably say white middle-class boys as well.
Yeah, it could. Yeah. But I'm talking specifically now about white working class. They're at the bottom, so their outcomes are right at the bottom. And you know what? We've known this for a long time. The first time I was asked to do a media appearance was in 2011, and it was about this. It was about, why are white working class boys not doing very well? Well, now white working class girls are not doing very well either. And so we've known about this for a long time. And the reason that does happen is because we've had these protected characteristics. So if you are black, you can tick the black box. If you're gay or lesbian, you can tick the gay lesbian box. But there's only one white box. So white working class kids tick the same box as white middle class people going to Eton. And
Right.
so you can't separate.
It's a bigger hurdle then.
Yeah. So therefore, when they say white working, or when they say the white group, it does much better than the ethnic minority group, it's because things are changing a little bit. But traditionally, people, black, Asian people, they did come from the working class. They're working class too.
They came into working class communities.
Yeah, that's right. They were working class too, but they would tick a box that said black. So we knew. So when we started to look at this, we could see who was not doing very well.
So hold on, are you very critical of immigration levels then?
Am I critical of immigration levels? Yes and no. I'm critical about how immigration has been used. So how immigration has been used over the last, God, I don't know, many years, but especially the last 5, is sort of bringing people in to do very low-paid, poor jobs.
It's to do the working class jobs at the lowest possible rate.
Yeah, at the lowest rate. So what that has done, it has stabilised low pay. It has stabilised low pay. And then...
because there's an oversupply of people willing to work at that lowest pay.
Yeah. And then what it's also done as well, it's sort of normalised this idea that the state gives benefits if you're not earning enough money. So so this sort of, the immigration that we've now got, so I don't know, 50, 60 years ago, immigration came because there was specific work to do, and it was very specific. So
Brickworks, the London Brick in Stuartby, just outside of Bedford. All the Italians came over.
The Italians, the Italians came, but it was very specific. In Nottingham, we got a lot of West Indians, Jamaicans that came, worked, in the transport, worked in engineering, also worked in the coal mines as well. But they came straight into the working class. Assimilated into the working class.
Well, the Irish were the kind of, look at every town else. It was the Irish that came in to build the railways.
My granddad worked on the railways.
Yeah. Exactly.
Came over for that.
I mean, I think that's the...
But the immigration that we've had over the last, I don't know, takes perhaps 10 years.
Yeah.
There's not been a story about why they're here. So the story's been missed, and if this is a political story, and the politicians have fudged it, so it's like,
that's my criticism of the right. I mean, because the right who are kind of called to be tough on immigration, it's the economy that they've supported that's led to this deregulated, low-pay economy. This is, I mean, it is fascinating.
Well,
really,
that's the right politicians who've done that.
Yeah, that's
the right voters have been against it.
Yeah. So the right-wing politicians wanted low paid. They wanted lots of Nigerian nannies to come in, that they could pay 10 quid for, or clean, that's what they, or gardeners or whatever. I think that the middle class today, parts of the middle class today, has probably got, what we would have looked at 100 years ago as they've got staff. Because there's people who are working for such a low rate that even middle class people can afford
cleaners,
cleaners, dog walkers. So we've got this very, very precarious, low wage economy that we've built from immigration.
An oversupply of low paid workers.
Yeah.
to keep the wages down. That's just basic economics, right?
Yeah. And again, if you're left wing, I'm not sure why you would be arguing for that.
Okay, so you guys know that I'm not just an equities guy. I'm a Bitcoin guy too. And for people like me, just holding Bitcoin has been the winning strategy. But for others, they like a little diversification. Whatever the strategy, each cycle, I'm always like, I wish I knew how to trade this. I just never try because I'm not a trader and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So this is where Arch Public comes in. They can help you implement a custom strategy that works for you. Because if you've held Bitcoin or Salesforce stock over the last year, man, you have taken every drawdown on the chin, but you can make that volatility work for you. They built a platform that automates layered trading strategies across stocks, ETFs, Bitcoin and commodities, handling buying, selling, profit-taking and accumulation, all directly in your own exchange account. So when they asked to sponsor the pod, I said I have to see this first. And they introduced me to their Market Way product, where you can customize buys and sells based on the triggers, risk profile and timescales that work for you. And that is what I've done. Now listen, I'm not telling you to go and blindly ape in, but if you're looking to protect your downside and make volatility work for you, give them a call. Ask to see every trade and make them prove the math. So if you're trying to accumulate smarter, take profits, use volatility or tax loss harvests alongside your CPA, take a look at Arch Public by heading over to archpublic.com/Peter. That's archpublic.com/Peter. Well, but there's two lefts. There's old school working class left, and then there's our Prosecco socialists that we talked about. Your bourgeoisie left, who live in Primrose Hill and vote for policies that decimate smaller towns, maybe more working class towns.
Yeah, and what they look at immigration through the lens of race.
Yes.
Whereas immigration is usually it's been looked through as the economy.
Yeah, of course.
And that is where, that's where this is now pulled apart, because we live in a society where questioning anything now about immigration as it's now being pushed through this lens of race.
Yes, you're a racist.
Yeah. And so the thing is if you don't want 10 vape shops where you live because you want some real shops, and you say, hang on a minute, why is there 10 vape shops? This looks dodgy to me. It's like that is being viewed through the lens of race. And race, it doesn't belong there. That should be the lens of the economy, community.
The foundation of the country.
Yeah. So this is where this is now where we've got to. And I would say all of that is class politics.
But the high street as well, he's been dying for years.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look, again, one of the places we're looking at, which is Lee in Greater Manchester, on the site of what was a coal mine there, which closed in 92, there's a retail park. So you all these, through the 80s and 90s, they were just going everywhere, weren't they? So they were sucking all the people in the shops from the town centres, and they're out in these retail parks now. That's particularly what you find around Greater Manchester.
But I say, when people ask you, why does class matter? Well, all of this has been pushed through, the class structure of Britain, really. How people see their country through their position and through their lens. So if you're middle class, of course you want as many low-paid people that could come and do your garden or put your patio on, or of course, And
I don't think it comes from there.
Don't you?
I don't think the middle class are thinking I want a cheap dog walker or my garden done cheap. I think this comes from lobbying at the highest level from the largest corporations who want things to make. If you own a hotel chain, you want the cheapest volume of people. You can see it now. Restaurants, hotel chains. The vast majority of people that serve you now are from foreign backgrounds.
Yeah.
I was at the IXG, Intercontinental Hotel, the O2 the other day. Every single staff worker in there was, I'm trying to think how to say this without getting cancelled, but wasn't white British.
Yeah.
You go into restaurants now in London, the waiters, the junior waiters used to be young kids, first jobs. Yeah. Now they're all Indian, Bangladeshi backgrounds, vast majority, I'd say.
Yeah.
And there's been a significant amount of lobbying to allow that to happen, to keep the wages down at the highest level.
And that's why you need mass unionisation.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the other thing. I think you see it in the US, but also more so here. You can track all this against the decline of the trade union movement. I mean, when we're talking about dismantling that working class world, one of the major features of that dismantling was destroying the trade union movement.
Well, what is so the role of the unions is an interesting one, because I like collective bargaining, but I don't like trade unions swapping votes for lobbying for certain policies.
Right.
And I'll come to that and explain it through the lens of running the kind of business I've run. The minimum wage now is, for a little coffee shop I have, is very high. Half my money goes on wages and about 25% goes on taxes and regulations. We don't make any money. Now, we now have a privileged minimum wage teenage class, which are the hardest people to recruit and employ and educate now in the workplace, because they start work with all these entitlements, and that's come from the lobbying. But I guess there's also, I'm thinking about this as I'm saying it, but there's a reason that's come, is because you went from confirmed careers for life and pensions to 0-hour contracts. So there's a big mess on the way there, but I don't think we've come out at a good place.
No.
So I'm pro collective bargaining. I just don't like unions. I prefer workplace unions.
Well, that's actually
what do you mean by that?
So I prefer, when you heard about Tesla workers unionizing for their factory, I like that. If my coffee shop workers unionized against me, I'd quite like that. What I don't like is a union coming in, sign this, sign that, and then them sitting down with Andrew and Lorraine and saying, we want all this and you get our votes, because we actually end up with sometimes destructive policies for companies.
But that's what businesses do, right?
Oh, yeah.
Businesses lobby politicians in the same way.
So it's
for
really,
policies.
Yeah. So really, what we're talking about, this is a war, then, really.
Yeah,
isn't
but
it?
an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Go on, boy.
The exact things you're saying you dislike about the businessmen lobbying, you're then saying you want the labour unions to do on your behalf. So
because it's about politics. Because it's an unequal relationship.
It's about changing the broken system. When you're identifying the other side to you. It's not about joining them and doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, but the system is broken because of that disconnect between that more levels of equality.
So then why fight it with the same
bosses
evil?
And worker? No, the working people in low-paid jobs can't fight because they don't have the power to do that.
This is the people to fight for them. I see what you're saying, and what we're really coming out here is there's two groups of people trying to fight for something fair. It makes me think of, in some ways, I used to think of politics quite simple. I used to think we would have a period of the Conservatives, and that would be low taxes, pro-business, grow the economy, and yes, it would be unequal, and then Labour would come in, and then we'd get some redistribution.
Right.
I felt like that's what we kind of used to get, and that's my simplified version. And then what's happened is, when Labour have come in this latest one, there's no money left.
Yeah.
Because the Conservatives didn't do what Conservatives traditionally do. And now we're in this position where there's all this debt in the economy and there's no money to go out. And I feel like that whole system has been broken.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any money and we had lots of debt after the Second World War. And we created a National Health Service, a welfare state, nationalised key industries. We did all that then.
We had a different calibre of politician, though, then, didn't we? We had a calibre of politician that believed that they were the politicians.
Well, we had working class politicians. We've got less of them.
Whereas now, the calibre of politician that we've now got are...
Is there anyone you like when you look at
politicians?
Yeah.
No.
Not one. You can't name one.
No.
How damning is that?
No, I can't name one really.
How damning is that?
Yeah, and I follow politics with a fine-tooth comb. I watch every news program. I'm reading, I'm writing, because that's what I do. I come from a very political family as well. My family were extremely political.
Keith, anyone you like?
I like Andy Burnham. I'm pessimistic in the way that Lisa is, in the sense that the model's kind of so broken. What would need to be done is so huge. And if you look at the whole kind of period of Thatcherism and that Conservative rule between 79 right through to the 90s, that's how long it took to kind of change the way we think about politics, economic models. And it would take a Labour government maybe 2 or 3 terms to do that. But Andy, but he started to use the language of class.
He's
talked about the broker model of the 80s, where
he has,
Blair and his kind of, the people that come after Blair, they thought a lot of the things that Thatcher did were right.
Blairism was, as absolutely as destructive to the working class as Thatcherism was, to be honest. It was because Blairism was the third way.
Yeah.
Where and what the third way was about was saying we have no problem with business, and as Mandelson says, people getting filthy rich. But what they thought they would do is they'd be able to redistribute some of that wealth. And they did that through the tax credit system. So they did do some of that. Then what you found out, and this is what my PhD was about, actually, is about this sort of ending of New Labour. But then what happened in 2008, when the banking crash happened, is that none of that had been real. So they'd not implemented real change in the system. All they'd done is sloshed money around. So when the money dried up, there was nothing structural had changed. So when once that money dried up, there was nothing. I saw it in my community where I lived, because money was being sloshed around for stupid things, really. Lots and lots of millions of pounds were going into local communities to, have a
Millennium Dome.
Yeah, or, taking kids to the cinema. And I'm not saying that's not nice or important, but it doesn't change anything structurally.
Yeah.
And what happened is once that money stopped coming in, and 2010 hit and we got austerity, what we found is that it collapsed because the money wasn't there.
We've always had that problem, haven't we? As a country, no matter who's been in power, that we want Scandinavian.
Yeah, we don't structurally change anything,
but we don't want Scandinavian levels of taxation. That's always been the problem. But we've got one foot in kind of the American political mindset of deregulation, free markets. Yet we kind of expect everything to work in the way that it does in other countries, the trains and everything else. But you can't have that if you don't invest.
What Blair did, what Blairism did, is it expanded the state. So it really did expand the state, and it employed lots of people on low-paid work in the state. So there was lots of teaching assistants, security that walked around cities, and there was lots of low-paid state sector jobs. The minute the money wasn't there, all those jobs disappeared overnight. And the same people who had been deindustrialised and made redundant from the factories and the industries that had then perhaps gone into local councils, they then got made redundant again.
Yeah.
So there was nothing structural that they'd changed. They didn't do anything.
And on the structural stuff as well, how is it patriotic to sell everything off? Why do we want the Germans, the Italians running our trains, water companies owned by people? It's like,
and none of them
surely
have done anything.
There's a disconnect between looking at the broken model, political and economic model we're in now, and politicians of every stripe who speak for the country. They've been part of this.
But back to what I said, is anyone speaking for the working class at the moment? And let me layer in another point to that. Have large or significant numbers of the working class moved to parties like Reform?
Yeah, they have. Yeah, they have. I mean, where I live, in Sutton in Ashfield, RMP's Lee Anderson.
What and why have they moved to Reform?
In these sort of deindustrialised communities, Labour started losing the votes from 1997 onwards. Actually, it wasn't overnight. They started to stop voting for Labour because these were places that only voted Labour. Yep. Absolute safe seats. Labour took the piss with that because what they did is they looked at their safe seats and they put their cabinet members in those safe seats. So we had ridiculous things.
And some ex-Conservatives.
Yeah. So we had these ridiculous situations where Peter Mandelson was representing Hartlepool. Tristram Hunt was representing Stoke-on-Trent. You had these, and they took the piss. They absolutely took the piss. So people stopped voting for them because they knew that they weren't for them. But there was no one else to vote for. And that was the problem. Yeah. And that was the Mandelson quote. They haven't got anywhere else to go.
But why are working class people moving to Reform?
I think what has happened is their recognition. Working class people absolutely know what has happened to them. They know what's happened to their communities. They know how they've been treated. They know that their lives are not better than their parents. So they know this. The Labour Party, they know are not going to do anything for them because they've been voting for them for 100 years. Some of these communities have been voting for Labour 100 years. Mansfield, for example, was, and then 2019, they gave Boris a chance, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Because of Brexit. Brexit was one of those marker periods where people voted, which was to change. They wanted change. That's what the vote was about.
There's another thing there which is not talked about as much as, and I think it's important, is the rise of English nationalism. Because in Scotland, the deindustrialised working class moved towards the SNP. In Wales, Plaid Cymru are picking up lots of votes, as we've seen recently. And I think that's been a crucial part of this, which again, they're reluctant to talk about more, is that rise of an English nationalism. And how does that fit with this kind of wider idea of Britishness? And if you think about English identity, it's been built around some of the things that we were talking about.
I mean, it's a huge open conversation now.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's gone from being considered something that's like, oh, that's those fringe,
yeah.
got EDF political parties, to things that mainstream parties now talk about.
But what does it mean? I mean, because you can see, having kind of family in Wales and friends in Scotland is a very different type of national identity that they have to say the English national identity.
Well, the English
the English national identity, it's still interlocked with this idea of empire, isn't it? And kind of military conquest.
It is.
Just have a look at the football songs. When England play, it's a very different, there is a strain there of this and the Second World War and all that kind of
German bombers.
Yeah.
I mean, there is. Part of English identity is still wrapped up in the Second World War. That's undoubted. That's undoubtedly. But I don't think that really explains the reform, the vote.
No, it doesn't explain it all.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't explain all of that because I would say what mostly explains the reform is that working class communities in deindustrialised areas voted Labour for 100 years. Then they tried voting Tory and then realised that didn't work. And then they thought, well, what else shall we do?
Yeah.
So there is also so that's not part of the English identity as well, the working class identity, is, they've got sort of a rebellion with the small r. So, voting for reform appears to be quite
I think the deindustrialisation bit, again, I think is really important because this is kind of anecdotal because just my personal observations from working underground, that the kind of rhetoric you get about immigration, about, kind of racism, a lot of working class people would say Enoch Powell was right, too many immigrants coming in. That was always there. I have many conversations and debates underground and in pubs, but it never translated into not voting Labour. And then since now it has, And part of that is because those working class people, like you say, Lisa, they were getting something from Labour.
Yeah.
They were getting something from the unions. And there was a wider culture where your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather would have voted Labour. So it's that it's the dismantling of that world.
Yeah.
And it's that political disconnect between work, community, and working class organisations. And that's what Labour are going to find out really difficult to get those voters back.
But we also as well then, so we also then there was a stronger working class identity then as well that all people could sort of join in on. So, for example, my ex-husband and his family, they all came from Jamaica. They came to Nottingham and then moved in on the council estate, and they were just part of the estate. And so their identity of themselves was, yes, Caribbean, but also working class British.
Yeah.
So there was an identity for them to be part of as
you
well.
You see that in British youth cultures, which I write about, two-tone music in the late 70s and 80s, bands like the Specials, the Selector, mixed race rock bands.
So immigration has not always been the same subject as it is today. Immigration had a different conversation around it sort of 20, 30, 40 years ago. It had a very different conversation around it. Today, and this is why the left has to accept that we're in 2026 and we're not in the 70s or the 80s. That's not where we are now. We are where we are.
But I think the left needs an identity because I think it's been butchered by the bourgeoisie left. And there's this complicated picture of the left now because I refer to the old left. What I remember growing up, like what Labour was under. I mean, the earliest I remember was really Kinnock, right?
Right.
But I remember the old left representing working people.
Yeah.
And this new left, this weird, like say in Bedford, we call it the Castle Road Mafia. You've got this weird bourgeoisie left that has enforced all these things they expect other people to live with that they're insulated from.
Yeah.
And it's affected the workplace, affected education, it's affected a lot. And so it's almost like, does the left even know what it is? Because it seems quite broad now.
Yeah.
We've had this almost like this flipping.
I think part of that is that, I mean, again, you can go back to the late 60s on this, isn't it? And the rise of single issue political campaigns, and politics of identity, all the class has kind of been pushed to the margins because some of these groups, they're very vocal and they have influence.
But politics really should be class in some ways.
Yeah.
It should be
Well, if
parties representing a class and making their classes represented and looked after and not exploited.
Yeah.
What we'd hope, wouldn't we, is that we live in a place where there's opportunity for everybody, and that there's nobody. We don't have something called homelessness. We don't have hunger. That's what we want to be. We want to get at that, and that's what the left used to do. That's what their politics was about, trying to get to this utopian point where there was no hunger, there was no homelessness, that jobs were safe, that people didn't go to work and get killed.
It's the post-war Labour government, essentially. It's the 5 pillars that you're...
Yeah, it's those 5 pillars. So that's what... If the left is anything, it has to be that. All this other stuff, this sort of identity politics and obsession around the Middle East and, obsession about sort of anti-Americanism, all of that, to me...
But that's class again, isn't it,
yeah,
Lisa?
But that's got nothing to do with...
But the people who you get who are... Which is... I mean, you're on quite a lot of media outlets and things, but on the whole, if you get people speaking for the left or the working class on media platforms, it's often some of the people that we're talking about. Oxbridge educated, middle class. This is the other problem.
The luxury Marxists.
Yeah, the bourgeois.
Well, but is it, there's a whole...
If
you think of Oxford and Cambridge when they joined the debating society, it's like, well, which party? I mean, Blair's father was a Tory, wasn't it? It's like, well, which party should I go Labour? Should I go Conservative? It's we talked about this, haven't we, in terms of it's a political game, isn't it? The special advisors,
But I think,
I mean, people like Mandelson, for example, I don't think does he believe in anything?
Does Starmer believe in anything? Does any of them, do they believe in anything? What is it that they believe? And again, when we look at our politicians today, there are some conviction politicians there. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is a conviction politician. I think he's rubbish. I don't think, his politics are bizarre. For me, they're bizarre because he's of the left. And even though he sort of dips into the things that I think is important, those 5 things, he definitely dips into that. He's also, part of this sort of identity politics stuff as well. And that I can't get behind. And
it's almost like they all are now.
Yeah, but the working class could never get behind that with Corbyn.
So Burnham's an interesting one in that I'll be very critical of him and I'll call him a communist or whatever. But actually, some of the things he's started to say I find quite interesting. He doesn't want the ID, the national IDs. He wants to get rid of that. I think that's interesting. I've heard him talk about dealing with business rates. I find that interesting. I don't totally hate the idea of devolution of power, although I do think you need a central base. It's what he's saying now and what actually happens.
Yeah,
is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah,
but my bigger concern is I don't know if any politician now can change the trajectory of this country for the better as we are. I actually think the whole political system is broken. I'm pessimistic like you.
Yeah.
I'm very pessimistic.
Well, I think we've got to have proportional representation for a start, because this is part of where people are feeling that their vote doesn't matter. Without a first past the post system. I mean, if you look at the Labour landslide, which was a landslide in terms of seats, but not in terms of votes.
Yeah.
So that is disconnecting people from the political process. the centralisation of power that we saw from the 80s onwards, stripping local councils of particular powers, all those things. So there are things that could be done. And Burnham's been successful in Manchester in terms of bringing people together across the political divide. I was saying to Lisa last night in my local pub, talking to 3 Reform voters, that they vote Reform in a general election, in the last election, but they vote Burnham for Manchester Mayor.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So he does go, he's got
Yeah.
an appeal. Now, whether that appeal will land in the south in the same way that it does in the north is to be seen.
What do you think politicians from the right do get right, or policies from what comes from the right that you think they get right that the left maybe gets wrong?
Well, as I've just said, I think one of the things that always strikes me about the right is the kind of country they want to live in. The policies that they advocate have led to the situation that we're in. That's so as soon as you kind of, if you can't get through that bit, then it's difficult to see where the right are on this.
But what do you think?
Because they want. I mean,
even historically, what do you think they get right?
Well, historically, what the right do is they represent the people who vote for them.
That's all politics. That's all of politics.
No, it's not. It's not actually. It's not all of politics. So, what the right do is they know who their political base is. They know who votes for them, and they know what they want, and they do that. That's what they do. That's not the same on the Labour Party.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
but I don't mean strategically.
Well, but that is what they do. So if you know your part, if you know the people who vote for you are mainly, small businesses or business people, and your party is also made up of lots of business people as well. What they do is they put business front and centre, and they make sure that business is well looked after, and that's what the right has traditionally done.
But it's not. Sorry, it's not what I'm asking.
Right.
That's strategically what I asked Ted Cruz this exact same question about the left and the Democrats, and he answer strategically. I'm saying in your shape of the world, the country you want to see, do you believe the right do things better than the left that are for the country, that make the country better?
Well, I think they did in the 1950s and early 1960s, where we had, and I know it's kind of criticised by some historians, but this idea of a post-war consensus. So if you look at the Conservatives opposed, for example, the creation of the NHS, but all through the 50s and into the 60s and for many years after, never advocated breaking up the NHS.
No.
A role for trade unions in the workplace. In fact, there was a Conservative Trade Union Association. There was an active organisation of Tories who were
and also the Conservatives after Attlee continued with the mass council house building. They also continued with the slum clearance. So, they got rid of a lot of the old slums as well. So in the past, we have had consensus politics but the consensus was about the country, not about perhaps their particular politics.
Is that where politics is broken now?
Yeah.
That no one is thinking.
But I think on that as
Yeah.
well, you have to dismantle the Conservatives from the right, don't you? The kind of broader political right. I mean, that's what if you look at the kind of Thatcher period, well, even within her own party, some felt she wasn't a Conservative.
Yeah.
What she was dismantling, but she wasn't conserving.
Yeah,
that
she
kind
wasn't
of post-war
conserving.
Britain that
Yeah,
had been
yeah.
built. And it is a problem for the right, isn't it, for the Conservatives in particular, because as Lisa's already mentioned, young people, even kids from middle class backgrounds, still are going to find it difficult to get onto the housing ladder.
Yeah.
Middle class jobs are precarious now.
Yeah.
So what will they have to conserve?
Yeah. So
Which in some ways I think explains young people when they move towards Corbyn.
yeah,
He's offering them something completely different.
free stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
if you haven't got anything to, because that's what the Tories built their success
So
on.
I'm
People
concerned.
moving
Yeah.
from council housing to private housing.
Yeah.
Moving perhaps from Labour
But they had a
voting
vision.
to
But again,
Conservative
they had a
voting.
big vision of Britain, didn't they? I mean, even Mrs. Thatcher, she had a big vision of Britain.
Even Tony Blair did.
Yeah, Tony
Yeah,
Blair.
yeah.
What were we going to look like? And the problem that we've now got is I don't know if any of them know what. They don't know. They don't know what we want. They don't know what we need.
Or is it even possible?
Yeah, I think
One
what
of
can
the
they do?
things
Yeah.
I've like thinking a lot about is it even possible in a world where in social media everyone has an opinion? We can live in niche small we can. when we talked about earlier, we talked about the working class was a very distinct group with their communities, and the middle class very distinct group with their communities. But everything's got a bit blurred.
Yes.
And you can join niche groups, social media groups, and there seems to be a lot of "I want for me" at the moment. So can you really create a vision for the country? And politics is so filthy and dirty now. I don't know if it's even possible. I don't know if we're just going to live through a long period of chaos. I mean, this continual rotation.
Well, we are living in that chaos right now.
It's the crisis of social democracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You said it's that,
But,
and in some ways,
do we just need
can
a king?
see how that.
Do we need a king?
Just a king.
No, no, we don't just need a king. No, what we need is we need storytellers. We need people to tell the story of who we are and what we are in a more honest way. One of the things that we've got right, what I'd say now about society is it's extremely dishonest. It's extremely dishonest.
Well, we used to be a high trust society.
Yeah, it's a very dishonest, but everything about us is dishonest. History is being rewritten and retold many times, depending on who's listening. There's not a definitive. This is actually what happened. Everybody can change.
But also that disconnect between politicians and where they're from, their communities, and that goes back to what we were saying earlier.
Yeah,
if you look at the amount of coal miners who were Labour MPs from the early 20th century, and the working class have been eroded.
John Major talked about this. I listened to his interview on Rest of Politics because he was from a very working class background.
Yeah, he was.
Poor family in Brixton. He became a conservative.
They were music hall people.
Yes, and he said you used to get Labour politicians who used to come from their communities. They used to work in their communities. They might have been in the trade unions or they might have been in the factories. They came from them. And the conservative ones used to come from like business or the military.
Yeah.
And it was they all had experience. He said, all we've got now is a graduate class that is climbing a greasy pole of politics.
Yeah.
There were also very active conservative local associations and Labour Party branches. I think John Major even met Norma at one of the Conservative Association dances.
Right.
So they were bigger. They were mass membership parties as well. I mean,
but what we were talking about is about this sort of social fabric in Britain, and people too often they dismiss that against the economy because they'll go, it's the economy but also the social fabric of the country as well. So, if you remember, every town and every city had a Labour club, a Conservative club, and a Liberal club, didn't they? And everybody thought they were places to go and have a drink, but they were connected to those politics, weren't they? So that's where the Labour meetings used to be held. That's where the Conservative meetings used to be held. So politics was part of the community. It was inside communities. And what's now happened, politics is in Westminster. It's not in the Liberal club.
Also the pubs. I mean, you've seen, the amount of working class communities that we drive through. What do you say? Boarded up pubs.
Yeah.
So they've made them unaffordable to run.
Yes, they have. Yeah, and so again, what we've now got is we've got not just the erosion of the economy, but we've got the erosion of our social fabric. We've got the erosion of our identity and who we are. And so, is there any wonder none of us is feeling very optimistic or hopeful because none of us know what's.
Have they destroyed the opportunity for a voice from the working class communities? Because there's a very active voice within the higher education system. Yeah. But that seems to be breeding this activism class. There is a lot on social media, media that's controlled, but has the working class voice been killed off, silenced, suppressed?
Well, we saw recent years in the Labour Party, they've deselected local candidates and made sure they've got candidates selected by the leadership and dropping them into those constituencies. Yeah. Particularly in the what would be known as the Red Wall.
Could you imagine someone like me, someone like working class, but also I've got an education, somebody like me, but I wouldn't have the right views on everything, which you would think that would be a good candidate for a politician. But when you've got a political class that is there for itself. It's kind of Marxist, isn't it? They become a class for themselves. So you've got a political class that is now for themselves and for itself. So their point.
That's the language of uniparty.
Yes, yeah, and I know that people talk about the Uni Party as a right-wing conspiracy, but if you break it down and don't call it Uni Party, but you call it, you explain the processes, that
I just think it's organic. It's an organic, self-protecting
But
system.
if you say Uni Party, the left go, ha ha, you're far right because you've said that word.
Do you get called far right now?
Yeah. I get called everything. I mean, I get called from, bigots, fascists, racists.
Welcome to the club.
I've been being called this for at least 15 years now. I wrote an article in The Guardian in 2015 about refugees, and I wrote the article which basically said that asylum seekers and refugees are not put in wealthy areas; they're always put in the poorest areas, and that's not right. And I became overnight a fascist.
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is
that one article.
The bourgeoisie, Prosecco socialists are insulated from the things they vote for.
Yeah.
They enforce the worldview that they want on other communities.
Yes, they do.
But they are starting to certainly experience the tightening of the belts with the cost of living.
Yeah.
That is starting to happen. Because I think we're going to go through this really interesting period. I think the middle class itself is starting to be eroded.
Yes, it is.
And I think...
as we say, the precarious employment and...
All young people now, all young people are very precarious.
Well, we had David Goodhart in here the other day, and I said, I think my opening question to him, correct me if I'm wrong, Connor, was, are the graduate elite now going to experience what... through
Is
AI.
AI going to do to the graduate elite what factories did for the work?
What globalism did to factory workers.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to experience it now.
Yeah.
But politicians have all started, they're voting for things that, that they're forcing on communities that don't want those policies.
Yeah.
It's the same.
I can't help come back to that. The political solution isn't going to come from what we have at the moment. I think it's just fundamentally, utterly broken.
Yeah.
And I think every time I vote, I'm part of a system that reinforces and protects itself and ultimately damages the country. I did a lot of work looking at the money. And you probably know all this. We spend more now on debt, just interest, than we spend on education.
Yeah.
There is a continual supply of money if you're the government and you want to print it. And there's a continual supply, there was a long-term continual supply of low-interest loans from the banks, which is money created out of thin air. That just pushes all the money up to the top 10, 20%.
Does,
and it makes life more expensive for everyone else. And I think unless we fix that, I think both the working and the middle class are going to get destroyed.
Yeah. Well, that's what's been happening over the last, since 2008, hasn't it?
Yeah.
That
they learned to print money.
Yeah, they printed money, but unlike what they said would happen, is it would be distributed everywhere because people would just spend it. It didn't, did it? It just went up. And what we saw after 2008 is that 0.1% of society get richer and richer and richer.
Yeah.
And
what was the thing today about the top CEOs own 130 times the salary of their average employee?
Yeah, and then you've seen that tightening at the bottom where people at the bottom have got poorer and poorer.
But on the solutions to this, surely, I mean, I think local democracy has got to play a role in this, isn't it? Where if your vote counts locally, and again, this is, Burnham's done well on this in Manchester, that if you're having powers devolved, more local democracy, people think they've got a stake within their community. It has to cut, because we've been centralised for far too long in terms of the Westminster bubble. If it works.
My favourite question to ask in this podcast, I ask it all the time, I'll ask it to both of you and then we'll roll from it, is can you name me one thing that's got better in this country over the last 20 years? What that's provided by the government?
God.
I'm happy, for any answer.
Well, over the last 20 years.
Yeah, education, health, board, anything. Anything the government provides over the last 20 years has got better.
So 20 years ago would have been...
It's a really good question. I'm racking my brains about that.
I don't have an answer myself.
Yeah.
6. What's happened?
You can go 30 years if you want.
I think opening up the university system to anybody and everybody has been, I think it's been a positive, because that's how I went into university. Because I went into university as a 32-year-old. There's no way previously that I would have been able to get there,
which is good.
which is good. I mean, but then the way that we've done it, which with the loan system, has been very bad.
It's a debt trap, actually.
Yes,
It's a debt trap for
but
many people.
opening up the universities and allowing anybody, because I spent some time in Denmark, and what they do with their universities at night is they turn them into night schools for locals.
Amazing.
So at night they switch, and all the locals come in. You've worked all day, and then you go to night school and you do history. It's not what we do here, which is go and do IT. It's actually history or art history, or you can get to do interesting
There are
things.
actually some other, I think, because there have been, hasn't it? And it kind of, I wouldn't say it's cross-party, but even people on the right or the left, for example, would say the railways have been a disaster, the privatisation of railways. So there's at least now there's an acknowledgement that everything that happened in the 80s was, not great as some claimed. So, and the same with the water companies. So that's really positive, I think, that the state saying, look, we've had enough of this.
But I was going somewhere with this. Like, generally speaking, people struggle with the question because really education hasn't got better.
No.
Health hasn't got better. And the borders haven't got better. The roads haven't got better. Like, generally speaking.
We're in we've declined. We decline,
But we have had a period of growth and success post-war. So, like, it is within our ability to actually make this country better. I also think, do you want to hear my controversial view?
Go on.
Inequality in itself is not an issue. And bear with me on this. Inequality is an issue when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. But if you, I think in terms of productivity, when we become more productive as a country, if your pound buys more stuff, then if you're getting a better standard of living, and maybe some other people get an even better standard, it doesn't matter. But what we actually have is a better standard of living for the very top and a worse standard of living for everyone else because of the way the money system works. So if you have inequality, but everyone's standards are rising, everyone's lives are improving, it can be annoying. But like everyone's standards are improving,
which is what we had in the
which is what
50s
it's the gap between inequality, and that's what the problem is. It's when the gap is big.
But if everything's getting worse, I mean, that's why I don't vote. If everything's pretty much getting worse, and the government's getting more and more in debt, and standard of living, living standards are dropping, and wages are stagnant, and inflation is ripping, to me, these are all downstream of government. I've lost the will to go, if I just vote harder at the next election, things get better. I think as an electorate, we have a responsibility to come together, poor, middle class, rich, everyone who's saying this is wrong, is to say we want something different. I think that's what we have.
But I think the voting patterns of the last 15 years have showed actually that people want something different. But what they've been doing is they've asking for something different from the same people.
And not getting
and that's what has happened. We've said to the same people, we want something different. This is why
Brexit is an example, isn't it? I mean,
well,
some people thought
this is why I'm not hopeful about Andy Burnham, because you're asking Andy Burnham, you're saying to Andy Burnham, we want something different.
It's got the same machine behind
but
it.
He's got the same machine. And you know what? Whoever's in his cabinet today, and they've made a big point about, isn't it great he's kept it a secret? Well, it's not a secret, because I tell you who's going to be in his cabinet. Labour MPs.
But but the thing is with that, it's always been the case.
Labour MPs.
If you look at the financial crash in 29, 31, they're still working with those constraints.
But the Labour MPs that Burnham is going to have in his cabinet are the same MPs who served under Starmer. Nothing is changing.
And do you know what's quite interesting? I think this was what was quite interesting, what happened to reform, is that they suddenly started appointing the same people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think people want something different. I think they want
massive
someone like
mistake.
You, Lisa. They want someone like you, Keith. Maybe someone like me. They want people who aren't.
Yeah.
They are from their communities and understand it and come in and actually represent people who haven't got some hidden agenda. But then maybe if we went in, we'd all get sucked up into the same machinery. I don't know. I literally don't know the answer.
Well, businesses work in the same way, don't they? You get sucked into the culture of the organisation.
I think reform has been good for British politics.
Yes,
and people would people will lose their mind when I say this.
Yeah,
but
I disagree.
I know he does, but they've been good for the reason why they've been good for British politics is because they've disrupted it. They've completely disrupted it. They've upended it. That saying, I'm not saying that they've
been an outlet for disgruntled Labour and Conservative voters.
That doesn't. You wouldn't have your Andy Burnham without reform.
Why do you think they've not been? What do you dislike about them?
Well, just because again they're divisive, and that's the problem. I mean, and the policies.
Who isn't divisive in politics?
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of these communities have already been hard hit by deindustrialisation. And then a lot of the rhetoric of reform is around most of this is down to immigration. And if you look at reform, I mean, Farage and others, they're basically Thatcherites, aren't they? So again, the policies that they advocate outside of the immigration which they centre on is going to do nothing for these working class communities.
But that's not what I'm arguing. I'm not arguing that they're going to be they're the party to vote for.
They voted against the extension to workers' rights.
Yeah,
in the
but this is the thing, Keith. There's two different things here.
They're an elite party.
Yeah, but you're looking at reform. You're as if somehow, there'll be a good government. But I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is the concept of this disrupting force that has come into politics and disrupted politics has been good for politics. Not so it's not about will Nigel Farage be a good prime minister. I think he would be a terrible prime minister. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is that reform has come in. They have really frightened the establishment. They've frightened them.
Yeah, but if I thought this was going to lead to a kind of energised working class and political activism and a move to the left, generally, I would agree, but I don't think it does.
Well, no. Can I ask you
it never happens when you get the rise of the right in that way. In fact, they pull, as we've seen with Labour, they pulled Labour further to the right.
Yeah.
Remember what did they have on their mugs or whatever, the Labour Party? Was it a few years ago?
That was what?
Tough on immigrants, whatever. But
Keith, that was 2008.
Keith, let me ask you something.
That was well before reform.
On workers' rights, they voted against it, the expansion. Did you fully agree with the full expansion of workers' rights?
Yeah, I agree with the extension of those. And I want the repeal of all the anti-trade union laws that were introduced by the Conservatives. I want workers I want people in these communities to have more say within their communities and within the workplace. And if we go back, we have to go back to the 90s. We're back actually to the 19th century where working class people could only get a better life through self-organisation, both in communities and both in the workplace. And this is at the heart of it, I think, which we forget. It's the working class is about work.
Yes.
If you can't live off work, then what do you do? I mean, this is it's a ridiculous situation that taxpayers are subsidising employers.
So in some ways they are, yes, they are.
And landlords.
But I also...
and landlords too, yeah.
But I also think that a lot of that actually, I think this is the bit I think the left misses, is the expansion of the money supply and inflation and how destructive that is. So going back to the productivity, we as amazing humans, we invent new things. Everything should get cheaper, faster, better. But they're not. Things are getting more expensive. And the reason things get more expensive is not that we're not getting cheaper, faster, and better at producing things, is we expand the money supply. And when we expand the money supply, there's more money in the system. But that expansion of the money supply is not even. So when the government expands the money supply, it goes to their cronies, their friends, or whatever they want to spend it on. And when the bank expands the money supply, there's unequal access. I've got more access to loans than, say, somebody in the working class. And if you're a big businessman with lots of leverage, you've got even more access. And what they do is they take those loans and they buy assets.
Yeah.
They take a loan in the depreciating currency and they buy the appreciated assets. That system's entirely screwed. But on the workers' rights, we should be in a world where right now that people at the working class at the bottom should have a much better standard of living. The reason they require more, higher minimum wage, more protection, is because the money is dying. I'm giving you a build-up. But I, as somebody who creates businesses, I am so disincentivized to create businesses now because of the workers' rights, because the workers' rights are being used as a defense against all this inflationary economics. But I can just tell, if somebody has full rights from day one, within their first week or so, I could have an unfair dismissal claim, and I could face multiple fake letters of I've been sick and I'm stressed and they can't come in. I still have to pay them. I can have any accusation labelled to me, and I can go into a 2-year process to try and remove what is a disruptive person. And it's really difficult. And that can cost me tens of thousands of pounds, and I'm entirely done nothing wrong. And so that balance on workers' rights, I just don't think we've got it entirely right. It's the problem with any law that the government makes is there to protect people like you rightly think, but what it actually does, it empowers people who want to exploit it. And that's my issue with it. So I don't know if that's...
But just on 2 points, they're looking at the bigger thing again, because we were told, weren't we, that kind of privatisation, deregulation, a smaller state will improve the lives of everyone.
Yeah.
And it clearly hasn't.
Yeah.
I think all three of us agree on that in terms of inequality and everything else. So that whole model hasn't worked. And yet the right still say, well, we need more deregulation. We need more privatizations. You know, that's still kind of rhetoric around that.
It's never even, the spread.
Yeah.
Like, you're obviously very critical of Thatcher. And I get why. And I get why all the working class are critical of Thatcher. But there was a net productivity and economic boost to the country under her. But if you're not feeling it...
in some places.
If you're not feeling it, why would you ever?
But on the workers' rights issue, again, and I think you alluded to this earlier, that if you had workplace organisation, a lot of those things would never have to reach legal processes. You know, this was settled, and you know, in the mining industry, a good example. Someone, you know, if you got caught sleeping underground on the night shift, you fell asleep, they fined you £10. It went to charity. You know, and the amount of sackings that the unions prevented or something they couldn't prevent. So again, it's having those workplace relations that don't need to be part of this culture where and who's getting rich off this? The lawyers.
But again, that's what we've done, haven't we? We've created this society that is highly legislative and complicated, and that's because of the breakdown in relationships between worker and industry, because the industries have moved arms, they're further away from the worker. So when I used to work at Pretty Polly, we used to make tights, my mum was the shop steward there. My mum, on a red hot day, and I know the Greens at the moment are making lots of political capital out of, they're going to like legislate for minimum temperatures at workplace. Do you know the reason why we probably haven't got that minimum temperature in law is because the unions would just do that as a matter of course. So when on a hot day, when in the factory where I worked, my mum would go, have a look at the temperature, go, right, she'd knock on the door of the manager, right, we're at this temperature now, these girls need a drink. And he'd go, oh, and she'd say, no, they need a drink. So there'd be drinks fetched. And then, you know, if it got even higher, these girls need a break. Oh, I don't think they need a break. Well, you know, it's either they're going to stop with, you know, or you can either tell them to stop for 10 minutes or they'll stop, they'll go home. So they'd go, oh, all right, then 10 minutes. And that isn't trade union power gone mad, is it?
No.
That's about a relationship between worker and management. And that's what used to happen. That doesn't happen now because, as you said, is, you know, for a start, the unions don't have those people in workplaces. The unions have paid officials. And the minute you phone them up and say, I've got this problem, then it becomes very official and, you know, and then the manager sort of, it becomes aware that if he doesn't follow process, he could end up in a lot of trouble. That relationship between worker and industry, you know, at the same time as industries were destroyed, that relationship was destroyed as well.
But that's true, isn't it, of organisations? Even if we wanted to organise a day out from the university for the students, the amount of paperwork that you would have to do.
That's a productivity killer as well.
Yes, it is. So well, the thing is we had all these. So why is the Greens now they're making such a big deal about this minimum, maximum temperatures people can work in? You know, you think, how did this happen when people worked in steelworks and they were working in, you know, massive in temperatures? Well, it worked because the trade union officer worked alongside you and he'd say, do you know what, we've had enough of this. And so you didn't have to need these sort of legislative, because
we've got extra money for working in water.
You got extra money.
Sometimes there were areas that were wet. You'd get wet money. Because you would need deep in water.
So what you did is you had, so it didn't have to be across every industry the same. It didn't have to be the same. because
You needed someone like your mum.
yeah, that's right.
But that's again, it's the disconnect,
Yeah.
isn't it, between employers and
But
employees?
you know what? I put that story on Twitter recently. Oh my God, I got absolutely trolled by sort of right-wing business people going, it's because of, the reason why there's no tights being made in Britain now is because of your mum.
No, it's not. It's capitalism. If you can make more money one way, you will.
Yeah.
You will outsource it. It's capitalism.
Yeah, but the thing is it's like, having that 10-minute break lost all this productivity. It's like, no, it's rubbish. That's rubbish.
But it comes down again, doesn't it? And what kind of country do you want to live in?
Yeah.
You're saying you have to get the politics right, you have to get the economics
But you have to
right.
get the story right. You have to get the story right.
And as we've said, everybody wants their own home. If they
Yeah,
can get
of course
one,
they do.
They want a decent job, they want a good education for their kids, and they want healthcare. That's basically.
Yeah.
Well, so therefore, it leads me to what is my final question. Well, I could sit and chat to you guys for hours, and I hope we do this again. This was great. Who is our country for now? Who is Britain for? Not who you want it to be. Well, both.
No.
Who do you want it to be for, and who do you believe it's for now?
Well, I think it's for the people that have profited from those changes we saw in the 80s and 90s. So landlords who own dozens of houses, who never have to work because they've got other people paying their mortgages for them. The speculators, as you've seen, the consultancy companies,
overseas
who take vast government money.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
The only way you can get
state.
rich now is taking government money. You set up...
And actually on this is an important point, I think, about the working class as well, because what you found, in communities like mine, people who, they took redundancy from their good industrial job, and then they wanted to provide for their kids because they knew what was coming. So they'd buy a second property and they rent that out. So it's instead, because in place of a pension...
Yeah, that's what
they buy a house as a pension.
Well, we destroyed the pensions. Yeah. We destroyed savings in banks.
Yeah.
I'm sure when I was a kid, my dad was getting 6-7%.
We've destroyed the housing market.
Yeah, because of too much planning.
Yeah, we've destroyed the housing market because, again, people need a house to be everything, not just the place to live. So you need a house to be an investment. 30 years ago, your house wasn't an investment. It was where you lived. Now it has to be your pension.
We keep coming back to the money.
Yeah. So who do I think Britain is for right now? It's for anybody that wants to come in and speculate and get money off our state. I think we've got a state that is absolutely capable of not giving money out.
And again, where's the patriotism? Selling everything off to foreign companies, the railways, the water, all the infrastructure.
Who do I want it for? I want Britain to have a story about itself.
Yeah.
That's what I want. And that's why I'm a storyteller. That's what I do.
And on that, that was again, with my historian's hat on here, that's what the parties did. If you look at Attlee and Labour after 19th, everyone... How did Winston Churchill lose the election after the Second World War? A big war hero, and yet it's Attlee's government that come in because they had that story.
Yeah, they had a story of building a new Britain for everybody. Yeah. For everybody.
That was also Blair's story.
Yes, it was. It was. It was Blair's story. Yeah.
But to be fair, if you look at just on the Blairs, by the end of that Conservative,
but what story have we got now?
The scandals and the corruption and.
But what story have we got now, though?
Yeah, what is the story?
What's our story about Britain now?
Well, where we're at or where we want to be, because our story of where we are now is
It's very depressing. It's actually a negative story.
Yeah,
and we're in a doom loop.
It's like civilizational. It's destruction.
Yeah, the story that we tell ourselves now is about the end of days.
Yeah, we're eating ourselves alive as a country.
And
England didn't do too bad in the World Cup. We've still got a thriving music industry.
No. There's so many.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There is, but
the trajectory.
Yeah, the trajectory.
I'm talking about what people tell about our country now is of decline.
I think it comes back to that. Do you know Thomas Sowell? The quote he said is that Western democracies will be remembered for replacing what works with what sounds good. And I think about that a lot.
But if we were having this conversation in the late 60s and in the 70s, the same things were being said.
Yeah.
That narrative of decline has been central to kind of political thinking, social commentary from the late 60s. Post-Suez.
But
even in the 50s, the decline of empire.
I don't think it's been as widespread as it is now. And I don't think it's been as fearful as it is now. I
It's
think
because of the precarity of
yeah,
modern
there's
life.
a genuine fear in society now. People are genuinely frightened.
You know, which is, and on that, you're going back to the kind of middle class in this. If you look at middle class professions, accountancy, the law, architecture, the lower levels of that, salaries have also dropped.
And there's another thing, when we talked about social mobility, if you're from the middle class, you've got another benefit that maybe working class don't have. You can just leave the country.
Yes, yeah,
You can just,
and
you probably find it easier just to fuck off to Australia,
Yeah,
America,
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what are we leaving behind for everyone else? I think it's grossly unfair.
Well, that's on the deindustrialized towns. That's what you see. So
Yeah.
in places like Leigh that I'm doing research on, when the young people leave there to go to university, if they go to Manchester, they don't go back.
They don't go back.
You know, and that's the thing. So there's a generation of people. So in a lot of these constituencies, and again, where reform's strong, they have a particular demographic.
Yeah.
Because as we know, the Labour
Yeah.
graduates tend to vote Labour.
Well, you know, social mobility now seems to be getting on a train and going to London. You know, and again, the regions, you know, that's the story that we now tell,
Well,
don't we?
HS2. I mean, if you look at the state of the railways around the northwest, that need lots of investment in to
Could
get
have rebuilt
people
the wall for that.
into.
Yes,
For a back
yes,
tunnel.
yeah.
I mean, it's,
But again, that's part of our national story now.
Lisa, you need to write the news story. You need to tell us what is it? What is the story we need to, what is the recovery story?
I don't know, the recovery story. What is it? It's about local people having, you know, their own voice, their own power, and making changes locally. And if every local area did that, each area would rise. But you can't do that when you've got a centralised government that are constantly bashing you.
Let me ask you another question, Keith. So me as a middle-class person will go, I pay too much tax, I work hard, I work 70 hours a week, I've done this for 25 years, I've earned this money, I have to give a lot back to the government, and now they want to raise capital gains tax. Well, I invested well, now I've got to give that away, and when I die, I want that to go to my kids and their kids, and I've got to give a large part inheritance tax. This all seems grossly unfair. Like, what's the argument against me for that?
well, I think, you could argue, couldn't you, which I would, it's grossly unfair to pay high taxes on your salary, but not similar taxes on your assets, which you're getting huge profits from, i.e. the kind of property pool.
But if I've already paid tax to buy those assets, that's what my defence was.
Yeah, but the burden of tax is still more on someone who's on a low income. They're paying an amount of tax that you're not paying on some of the assets that you have. I think that, and it's back again to where money comes from. That's the problem. And if we got a situation where work doesn't pay, this is the problem. You can have all the arguments you want about kind of taxation levels and everything else, but if work doesn't pay,
if work's paying, so if your work pays you to get your house, a holiday, a decent car, etc., you don't care I don't care what you're getting. That's the truth, isn't it? I don't care what you're getting, because if I'm doing all right, and that really is, but the reason now everybody cares about everything is because people feel that the work isn't paying. You know, the amount of times I hear about this passive income, you need passive income, you need passive income. And it's like, well, what? And that's an admittance that your labour, your work isn't paying.
Or when me and Kurt made a documentary in Bedford, where we're from, what was the other thing? Harlow. And we went to a food bank, and there's a nurse there. In a food bank. We had a conversation with her. She's like, well, I don't earn enough to get by.
Yeah.
You know, that's obviously a disgrace and a shame on our nation. I think we're actually probably come to the same conclusion there, where I was saying, as long as the pie's getting bigger, cost of living is falling, living standards are improving, people are okay. There's some differentials.
I just think, you know, if you could imagine a society that you'd want to live in and you wanted your kids to live in, and you know, you didn't know you could vote for that society before you entered it, I think we'd all want a fairer society, wouldn't we? We'd want employment. You'd want where stuff gets better. And it's more, the people that argue against kind of increasing regulation and taxes are the people who've got a lot. Yeah. That's the thing. If they had nothing, I think they'd probably be very, you know, from a very different position.
I think if we all also understood,
because we all sink ultimately.
Yeah, we do.
But that's I think the problem of the country is sinking. There is a very slither at the top.
I go to the US a lot, with research and travel and things. And, there's some of the inner city areas in the US now are just...
Do you know what's interesting? We went out
beyond.
We went out to the World Cup, and after the Congo game, was it, Connor? We met those two English guys who'd moved out there, and they said they'll never go back to the UK, or they don't want to go back. They said the thing is here is they create every opportunity for you to improve your living standards. And I don't know if you saw that survey that came out, whereby if the UK was a US state, where it would rank. Do you know about this survey?
Would it be around West Virginia?
Well, give me this 50 states. Is it? Give me a number where you think would be about.
Well, I imagine it would be. I did see this thing. It's at the bottom, isn't it?
We're at the bottom. We're poorer than Mississippi.
It's even beyond West Virginia, isn't it?
Well, Mississippi is the poorest.
And then
we'd
it's
be but British people think we'd be 7th. Yeah. And when I first went out to the US, I went in just after 2002. I went to New York the year after the terrorist attacks. It was $2.05 to the pound. It's now about $1.30.
Yeah.
Productivity in the US is increasing. Ours is stagnant, and their GDP is climbing at a much faster rate than ours. And so I think what's happening to our country, yes, inner cities, you're absolutely right. The rest I'm not going to argue with that.
Inequality.
But us as a nation, there is a slither of people at the top that know how to make this country work. They know how to make the Bank of England work for them, and the government contracts to work for them, and the lobbying to work for them, and bank loans to work for them. And that small group is sinking everyone else. Yeah. And I think the story is the country's sinking, basically. And I think we have to get to a stage where it isn't.
Yeah.
I'm on the money. I think it's all about the money. That's a starting point. But I absolutely agree, and I've learned a few things today from you guys, that we've completely and utterly and shamefully ignored the working class, which is I don't want to sound like a condescending prick. If I do, I apologize, but I had blind spots before I met you guys. Can we do this again sometime?
Great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you want to tell people about your research, where to look into it?
Well, just me and Keith, we're doing some research in the deindustrialised communities. We're focusing on Sutton in Ashfield and Lee in Manchester at the moment. We're interviewing working class people in those areas that's been deindustrialised. They're telling us pretty much the story that we've just told in this podcast. We would like to extend that research and really start to bring the coastal areas into it. That's what, it's important. The story of the country is important, and we're collecting those stories.
When do you think that will be done?
So we're doing research over the next year. So hopefully then we'll probably start writing papers and maybe
articles.
A book will come out of it.
Yeah.
But I think, again, backing up what Lisa says, really, that the story of class has been marginalised in terms of our national story, but also even in universities. Again, there was lots of working class histories within universities. Now, if you do history in university, you're not likely to be studying the working class.
Put it this way, for many, many years, I've tried to get research money, because there's big research grants out there, millions of quid from academic organisations. And I've tried to get that money to look at deindustrialisation and working class people. The world of academia are not interested in those things.
Hold on, what was that thing they funded? We did the Europe the Gay Porn Bill.
Yes, that's what. Yeah,
they got $1 million.
Yeah, I know.
You can't get $1 million for this.
I put in a fantastic piece of research to look at Bedford, because actually Bedford is also a deindustrialised area, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because of the car industry, Luton and Bedford. No takers.
Yeah, we lost Vauxhall. Maybe you can hoodwink them. Just, I don't know, make it something to do with LGBT and working class communities, and just get the funding.
Doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, they'd look into my background, they'd look into Keith's background and go, "Oh, hang on a minute, we don't trust these. We don't trust these two." But I'm
glad you're doing the work.
It's ongoing.
It's what you're saying about politics. There's lots of gatekeepers in academia.
Yeah.
And
it's
ongoing.
Class
in themselves, aren't they?
It's ongoing because the situation's ongoing.
Well, good luck. I hope this was good for you as well. I didn't sound like too much of a prick at times, but honestly, keep doing it. Brilliant work. Thank you. And really appreciate you both coming in. And I really want to do this again. And I say this a lot. It kind of turns me off. But I could chat to you for hours. There's loads I didn't get to ask, but we've come to a close. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you to everyone for listening. We'll see you soon.